Danish, we're live.
All right. Hello. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us in today's session on rethinking sustainable business through diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion is a topic that is and should be important to all of us. We all want to feel like we are well and fairly represented and that we have a voice on the table. The recent pandemic has, in many cases, reinforced some of the challenges societies face. For an organization and for a society to be sustainable in today's world and to have relevance, it needs to ensure that it is diverse and inclusive. In today's panel, we will discuss the D&I agenda and how it can help businesses achieve their sustainability goals. I'd like to take this moment to thank all of our partners, and I will be thanking them in detail at the closing of today's session. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Chaminda Kumarasiri, who is the chairman of Hcp Consulting. Chaminda is a senior chartered accountant, corporate trainer, leadership coach, management consultant, and business advisor with a wealth of knowledge and many years of experience in the corporate world. He has held senior leadership positions in leading local as well as multinational organizations. Chaminda is a fellow ACCA member. He is also a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka, the Association of Accounting Technicians of Sri Lanka, and he is an associate member of the Institute of Certified Management Accountants of Sri Lanka. He has obtained his BSc in accountancy from the University of Sri Jayewardenepura with a first class and completed his MBA in finance at the University of Colombo. Chaminda is the chairman and founder of Hcp Consulting, which is an end-to-end management consulting and business advisory firm with a special focus on SMEs, and he currently serves as a member of the governing council of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka and as an advisor / director of a few companies and national bodies. He is a member of the International Panel of Accounting Education of International Federation of Accountants as the only representative from South Asia. Without further ado, Chaminda, over to you.
Thank you, Danish, and thank you, ACCA, for having me for this timely topic. And it's indeed a complex and deep topic that I have to discuss, but unfortunately in the given time slot, I'll try to do justice within my abilities. Right, the topic we're discussing today is rethinking sustainable business through diversity and inclusion. I put together a few slides to talk about the subject that I'm trying to discuss. Let me see. I can take you through the slide.
See if you can't?
Right.
Not even now?
Hope you can see the screen. So if we look at this concept of diversity and inclusion, I must say that from different perspectives, different angles, different domain perspective, there are variety of definitions. People debate about what it really means. In fact, the definition of diversity is also coming from diverse perspectives. So is inclusion. So I'm not trying to talk about a theory here. I just want to bring it to a practical perspective. How should we look at this? So if you look at these two words, it's in a sense, diversity is the fact that we appreciate the differences among people, opinion, and things. So the fact that we see they're different, the fact that we see that things can be different and we can have the same thing but can have different point of views. So we can keep on talking about it. And inclusion is the fact that we bring that element into wherever we want to talk about, maybe in our organizational context and wherever we work. Now, if I put it in a very simple frame, so if you want to develop a garden, you can have the garden with same kind of trees. It's your choice you make. But at the same time, if you appreciate the fact that there are different types of trees in the world, and why not we have a wonderful garden with all types of trees or whatever possible? And that is the first one is a stereotype. The second one, you have some kind of a difference. So it's diversity. Now here's the catch. It's easy to work with diversity because it's the fact that you appreciate the differences. But the harder thing is inclusion, because that is where you really execute it, right? So it's always easy to say, yes, I appreciate different points of views. I appreciate the contribution coming from different people. But when it comes to execution, that's where the real challenge comes. That's why we say, if you appreciate diversity, then inclusion becomes the implementation place. So that's where you bring in inclusion into the picture. So that's where most of the organizations fail, I think, when you talk about, you have nice fancy policies published in your social media, your website, everywhere. We are an organization that appreciate diversity, but inclusion, do you really mean it? That's where the real problem comes. So in an organizational context, if you look at, so I will not take much time here, I just quickly go through. The research findings have said why we need this and how organizations can benefit. So leaders in diverse and inclusive workplaces possess higher intelligence and skills to manage diversity because they're exposed to diverse waves. They're exposed to looking at different things. And diversity helps build better strategies. Again, when you have the ability to look into multiple perspectives, it brings that perspective into your mind to build better strategies. And the diverse teams are more innovative and better prepared to take bold actions. And if you look at in organizational context, this is what we see even in the pandemic situation, how organizations have responded to changing circumstances. And if you look at the inclusion part of it, inclusion leads to better decision making. Why? Again, you bring different perspectives to the table. Right? Inclusive workplaces have better psychological safety, enabling employees to take risks. Why? Because then everyone feels safe. Everyone understands that they are different to the other. But if the organization is inclusive, they feel safe to work in that context. And inclusive teams are not scared to share vulnerabilities because they know that their views are being appreciated. They have no fear of being rejected or ridiculed. So these are some of the benefits that why we need to have this in an organizational context to get the best out of it. And also, if you look at the COVID-19, we cannot ignore that the COVID-19, how it has brought in the diversity into practice. So the being able to empathize people in the context like this brings that diversity and inclusion perspectives much more stronger in organizational context. And work from home setups have demanded because we have different types of workers in an organization, so that different people will respond differently to work from home situations, especially the younger generations responded faster compared to the older generations who are not that savvy in technology. And the tech versus touch. So you are now dealing with the technology and you lose the human touch. So how you deal with this in different types of organizational contexts and different types of people in your organization, and the processes that you need to have in place to cater to these things. So we have redefined all our processes. As finance professionals, how we should look into this and how we should embrace this and engage in our organizational context. First, we need to make sure that we have strategies and proper leadership in an organizational context to deal with it. And we should be able to support and encourage the culture in an organization that appreciates diversity and actually embed inclusiveness. Then the responsibilities have to be given. You have to identify responsibilities among different units and people when you really implement this. It's not an HR job alone, it's everyone's job. And finally, you need to have processes, as I mentioned in the previous slide as well. How should we bring in the required processes into the picture to have this diversity and inclusion culture in place? And that's the end of my slide, but I just want to leave you with few thoughts. If you really want to get the best out of this, we need to ask some of the vital questions from ourselves. Do I really recognize and appreciate the issues that my colleagues face and their perspectives? Ask from yourself. This is a self-assessment to see how far you are embedded with this. Am I being authentic in my behavior? Right? When we talk about diversity and inclusion, you should be authentic in your behavior first and be yourself. So that will help you to make it happen faster. And do I recognize my biases, both unconscious and conscious bias? So that's another difficult area that we need to tackle when we talk about this, because we naturally go with our biases. Finally, do I appreciate the importance of multiple viewpoints in decision making? Because decisions are not all about looking at only on one angle. You have to be able to look at different angles. So in the interest of time, I think I must allow my fellow panelists to engage with the crowd and discuss the matters. So I didn't want to go beyond the allocated time. So I'm open. If you have any questions from me before you go to the panelists, if that is permitted, I'm fine. Otherwise, I can stay around if you need me around to respond. And thank you very much for your patience hearing. I know it was short, but I believe it's sweet as well. Thank you, and all the very best to everyone.
Thank you very much, Chaminda. Short and sweet. Right, so I'd like to introduce our moderator and the panelists we have for today's session. So our moderator for today's session is Zania Hook, FCMA. She is a director within Finance Excellence and BPC Finance for Unilever in Bangladesh. As for our panelists, we are joined by Mohammed Shoaib, who is the Chief Executive Officer for Al Mizan Investment Management. We have Faryal Sadiq, Vice President Sales and Marketing for Interloop Limited. We have Nashida CC from Niche Consulting in the UAE. We have Mariam Riza, CEO of Waddleshire, Australia. And we also have Mohammed Shaheen Iqbal, who is the president of the CFA Society in Bangladesh, but also is the head of Treasury and Financial Institutions for BRAC Bank Limited. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the session.
Hello, thank you, Danish, for introducing myself and all our panelists here. So good evening, everybody who's tuned in to watch this program. I must say we have a very rich panel here today, across Asia and Middle East, okay, the best of the best, okay, in their own galaxies, okay. So yeah, start within their own galaxies, okay. So what we'll do is, we will, each of the individuals here, okay, have a vast extents of experience, okay, and it was really wonderful when I was connecting with all of the panelists individually to know, the kind of work they have done across diversity and inclusion in their own work, okay, and I really hope we can do justice to the work they have done and bring all this in front of you. Some of the thought-provoking, food for thought that the Chaminda has also left, for us in his speech, okay, and we hope that throughout the questions and through the responses, we can bring it out and we can all, end the session with really good things that we can take back to our own work spheres. Okay, so I'll kick off the evening with Mariam here. Okay, so Mariam joins us from Australia and from Melbourne, and Mariam is really she's got this encompassing experience across human capital engagement. She is our award-winning strategist, a consultant, okay, an advocate of diversity and inclusion. And she has had she's a specialty in intergenerational inclusion. Okay, from that angle, Mariam, what we'd like to hear from you is, all these recent generations we talk about, the millennials and the Gen Z, and how do they look at sustainability? Consumer shift, no, and consumer choices, shifts in consumer choices. Okay.
Thank you for the question, Zelia, and thanks for the introduction as well. It's an interesting one. So I think the next generation, effectively the millennials and Gen Z, are voting with their feet, so to speak. And I think in order to understand any generation before and after you as well, it's interesting to always look back at what were the formative events that happened in their childhood or in their early adulthood that formed who they are as people. When you look at millennials and Gen Z, or particularly Gen Z, they are a generation that has watched their parents go through the Asian financial crisis, the global financial crisis, and so many shocks and waves economically as well. So they desire quite a bit of stability in their life, but they are also very tenacious and ambitious to drive, the agenda and the advocacy that they truly care about. So as a consequence, when they look at sustainability as well, they acknowledge that the planet, people, and social, both economic, social, and environmental, have had negative or adverse effects. And they are seeing some conversations around it, but they want it amplified or accelerated as well. So fundamentally, they want action, but they want to see action, and more specifically, they're quite they rank quite highly in self-efficacy. So they rank quite highly in terms of being very perceptive in terms of greenwashing as well. And I know Chaminda did touch on this as well in his previous conversation. It wasn't necessarily about just diversity, but also inclusion in terms of the next step as well. So fundamentally, in summary, they're looking at making change. They're looking at making substantial and significant change across the board in organizations, and they're voting with their feet. And how that works is they're willing to spend more on products that are socially conscious. They're willing to work for organizations that are aligned with their value set. And more importantly, they're willing to stand on the streets and actually start advocating for and driving some of the policy agenda that is required in organizations across the board. So all the generations have always been very vocal about sustainability. It's just the new generation is using the technologies and the ammunition or the tools at their hand to be able to accelerate and amplify advocating for that message as well. Thanks, Anya.
Yeah, very true. I think we're talking about, when you say sustainability, you rightly put it, that it's about bringing in the actions. They really want to see, how are these things materializing in the workplace, and also in the decision they made in terms of choices. Okay, and that's where I think these two concepts are so pertinent to today's world. Okay, sustainability, which is more tangible, and then you have the angle of diversity and inclusion, which is the fabric, in our societies and our organizations, and really how do you connect both of this together? And so this is where I move to Faryal Sadiq. We have Faryal with us, okay, and Faryal, after her very long management consultancy career, she decided to move back to Pakistan, okay, and join in the leadership board of the second largest exporter, ready-made garments exporter. And Faryal, I'm aware that Interloop, okay, has just recently concluded a 5-year strategy planning exercise, and you have articulated your vision saying to become a full family clothing partner of choice. So what we would like to know from you, Faryal, is that you also talk about in your company, papers about having a diverse, inclusive, and engaged workforce. We want to know how you connect this diverse set of workforce with the vision that you have of becoming a partner of choice. And especially now that we have heard from Mariam, about these choices, getting a shift with this new generation. So how do you connect your diverse workforce with the choices that these new generations are making?
Thank you, Zinia. And first of all, thank you for having me on this panel. I'm really glad to be part of this really interesting discussion. As you've stated that we have a vision over the next 5-year strategy for Interloop, which is about growth, which is about expansion and investment, while continuing to operate as a responsible manufacturer. That said, the numbers are important, but what's even more important is the journey for us and how we get there. And that's where our biggest enabler is the people. It's the war for talent that's going to really pan out how successful you are in executing your strategies. One of the pillars that we have is people, so diverse, inclusive, and engaged workforce, as you've stated. So our goal is to really build a diverse workforce, to achieve a ratio of 30% in our workforce. Now that seems small or low, but given the context of Pakistan, where the female labor force participation is one of the lowest in the regions, it's still an uphill task for us. At the same time, we've also set a target of having 80% of our people trained on the new skills and capabilities that are required to operate in this new world. We've just spoke about COVID and the work from home and the impact that it has had on on the way we work. So really making sure that people are trained on these diverse skills, whether it's digital skills or working with robotics and machine learning. So emphasis on this diverse training. But at the same time, I think what's really helped us, and that is to start at the top. Having a diverse leadership or decision-making body has allowed us to really build this ambitious and bold vision, right, which is to double our size. It's not just the gender diversity, but it's the cognitive diversity of the group. So we have 25% women in our management committee. Our strategy making board had representation from Pakistan, from Sri Lanka, from Netherlands, the US. So it was just these multiple experiences which really allowed us to build a bold strategy. And then it's now we're taking the strategy and rolling it out to our people. So we've done road shows and putting together an ideas hub where these different ideas are coming through on how we achieve some of these targets, and some of them are fantastic. So really, I think the diverse leadership helped us put that whole strategy together, and now it's engaging our people in different levels, which is bringing in that diversity of opinion, which is going to help us achieve this vision. Fingers crossed.
Thank you, Faiza, for sharing that with us. Yes, I will come back to you, of course, again. I'll move on to, you're talking about the workforce, and of course, the step before the workforce is really the preparation for the workforce, and that's where the academics play in. And all of us are, professional accountants here. I think it's most of us. Okay, so I move on to Mr. Shoaib. Okay, and we are aware that Mr. Shoaib, you're also the board member of the CFA Society in Pakistan. Okay. And we just heard about the context of gender diversity in Pakistan as well. But can you help us know, in terms of the CFA, the professional institute, what kind of roles can professional institutes play to enable our female students or our young female when they join the career, and help them kind of feel inclusive into the overall workforce? So if you can share things that CFA in Pakistan have done, or your views on what more can be done around the country.
Thank you, Zinia, for this excellent question, and thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to be present in this forum. So you have asked a very interesting question, and quite honestly, what we have seen is that in terms of gender diversity, inclusion, all these issues generally are highlighted at the corporate level or at the regulators level, and there's always a push and focus and emphasis that we should have more gender diversity at the workplace, there should be more representation on the board. But what everything generally, I would say, ignores or fails to appreciate is that the educational institution should play a very important role there. And that is the starting place actually to start the journey, because what happens is that when obviously considering Pakistan, certainly we are no comparison to the more developed world. For example, in USA, 47% of the labor force is represented by women. Now, in a country like Pakistan, where unfortunately we don't have good efficient availability of statistics as well, I'm pretty sure that the representation of female in the educational institution is probably 20%, if not less. Now, given that this is a very serious pipeline issue, and because of this, what happens is that while at the board levels or at the companies level or at the regulators level, we have a lot of discussion how to increase the representation of women. But if the educational institutions are not supporting it, then certainly it cannot be achieved easily. And that is the challenge we face all the time. So from that perspective, CFA Institute and CFA Society Pakistan, in collaboration with the institute, has actually been working very hard actually to promote, to bring the female members and female candidates to the community, to the CFA community. And I'm very pleased to report that out of our new candidates which register from CFA exam in Pakistan, about 40% are females. Now, that has not happened overnight, that has happened over the years. And one of the key reasons is that there's a lot of focus from CF Institute as well to bring more women in finance. So areas like technology, areas like investment management, where the representation of female is very low. I was looking at one of the case study on Google and the high tech, actually information technology. And if I remember the statistics right, only 5 to 7% of their representation is there at the C level or at the executive level in technology industry, even in USA. So, so in addition to what CF Institute has done, we have also worked with them, and CF Institute is now regularly doing an annual conference, Women in Investment Management. And again, the idea is basically to promote these females as, I would say, role models which can be used by the upcoming generation. Now, one of the major challenges, even again looking at some of the studies that I've read through about different parts of the world, especially the more developed world, is that one of the biggest challenges for the younger generation female students and candidates is they don't find adequate role models. So if, for example, let's give you a very blunt example. Everybody in Pakistan, whether a male or a female, everybody knows about the cricket stars, male cricket team stars. Now, how many of us know about the female stars? So there's nobody to relate to. And if people would know about these role models, whether it is in education or investments or finance, certainly more and more younger generation of females would be interested in replicating that role model. So this is very, very important, and one of the very important initiatives that CFA Institute took actually about 3 years ago was to make sure that at the CF Institute board level, which is a totally independent board, only the CEO is the executive and all the other board members are non-executives and they are independent directors. So one of the initiatives taken by them at about 3 years ago was to make sure that the representation of females on the board is gradually increased to 50%. Now, if I was actually, I was representing the membership at the board level at that time, and at that time there were only one board member of CF Institute which was female. And now they're actually very, very close to that target. They are already in the third year and they are close to 40%. And I believe when the next board composition takes place, then the representation of females will be 50%. So my main point is, my key takeaway to the audience is basically that this is something which has to be promoted at the education institution level. We need to ensure that there's a lot of encouragement for female students to come up and they should participate in the educational programs. And education is the key. If we get a bigger pipeline in terms of education as far as female representation is concerned, then certainly there's no reason that the women cannot excel their gender counterparts in terms of different areas. And what we have seen is, in fact, to be very honest, what we have seen is that in most of the studies, if you look at the comparative studies, the female candidates generally take a lead over the male candidates. But in terms of their proportion, certainly it is lower. So that is something we need to work on, and that is we have been closely working with the CF Institute. I hope I have answered your question.
Yeah, thank you, Kishore. I mean, that reminds me of a remark made by my business school chairman. So when we started business studies, that was more than 20 years ago, right? And as you rightly say, it's instilled when you're at the age of 18, really still, molding in your brain. And we're all sitting down there. Of course, the male to female ratio was, female was still very low. But the very first thing was said by the chairman was that he said that all of you girls sitting here, if you think after 4 years of your university degree, you're going to go back home and cook and clean and whatever dust, okay? The door is open, you can walk out. Okay? So if the reason you're sitting in this chair is in place of a male has to work still. That is kind of, at least 20 years ago, that was still the thinking, a male has to, provide for his parents, his future family and all that. If you're sitting here, it's because you've taken the place of a male. Okay. So don't think for 4 years, okay, and then you're going to go home and sit there. It's not an option. So when you instill that kind of a belief, in an 18-year-old mind, okay, then it's just an obligation. The country has invested in you, okay, so you have an obligation to go back and return it. So I think you're very right, Shoaib. It's about really at the academics level to have the mindset change like that, And of course, we'll also talk about in our discussion at the next level how the employers can also help in terms of the culture, in terms of the policies, how to make that inclusion, come in. So still be on the gender diversity, aspects, and we will talk about our different areas of diversity. But while we're at gender diversity, I would move over to Nashida. Okay. So Nashida, and it was really wonderful speaking to you. Okay, and you join us from Dubai. And so first of all, I must give you credit for that example, the garden example that Mr. Jaminda brought up. And I'm very aware that the garden example was your example at a roundtable conference endorsed by ACCA, right? So it's a wonderful analogy about the gardens having, when you bring diversity is having different plants and inclusion is taking care of each of the plants. Okay. One of the very simple analogy that we also use back at my workplace in Unilever is diversity is about inviting you to a party, and inclusion happens is when you're actually on the dance floor. Okay, you're part of the group. Okay, so that's a very fun way of we also look have an analogy. So Nashida, so I know you bring a very unique perspective because your consulting firm, Nishi Consulting, has just finished its 5 years anniversary, and the big beauty of it is all female staff. Okay, totally all female entity. Okay, and I want to know how you came up with the concept. Why, why would you think of just female, and also how has this helped you look at having differentiated ways of working with a new entity? What is it that you really brought to the industry by having an all-female entity?
Right. First of all, thank you for having me here. How did I come up with an all-female concept? So I need to just go back to a little bit of my own background for that. So when before I started this, I was a director with PricewaterhouseCoopers Dubai. So when the idea of setting up an own firm came to me, around that time, I read a book. It's called Screw Business as Usual. And the title is fancy because it's written by Richard Branson. And the book is all about a number of companies, big or small, who are into businesses with a motive of profit with purpose. So it's not purely profit-oriented businesses which combine profits and purpose. So I was really, interested because I think probably many of you, all of us really want to do something for the society, but then all of us have our financial constraints and requirements as well. And the question is, how do you combine that? And here, there were ideas about combining both. So that's where the whole initial concept came, that when I set up, I need to have a social purpose as well for it. And then why women? So I've been living in Dubai for 30 years, but I come from India and come from a traditional family background in India. Now, I know most of us are from Middle East and South Asia, and we all understand how traditional families work, especially when it comes to their daughters. When it comes to daughters, what families want is their safety. Even the most well-meaning of the parents, what they want is safety for their daughters, and a lot of times it's by sacrificing their ambition. They may be highly capable, highly ambitious, highly intelligent, high academic brilliance whatsoever, but then because parents have this overarching objective of getting their daughters safe, they just want to probably get them married early. So that's my history as well. When I did ACCA, and when I completed my bachelor's degree, my son was already born. Yeah. So, and then I joined PwC after that. So this kind of a forced domesticity on women, it's in some ways it shackles you. It's then, probably many of them just lose their ambitions and then they just stick with the domesticity. They don't get out of it. So having gone through all of that, having experienced it firsthand and having seen, around the same thing around me firsthand, I think it was very natural for me to get into a female focus. So I think that answers first part of your question. Could you repeat the second bit again? You think what difference did we bring? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
The ways of, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, female focus is a core part of our identity. Yeah, but it's not the only part. And when you look at the broader overall business, so when I started, there was a lot of reflection about what do I really want with this business. And generally there is this thing that we learn in economics that the whole objective of businesses, or the fundamental objective, is profit maximization. Something that I didn't quite identify with. So I spent a lot of time learning, researching, thinking, reflecting as to what do I really want to do with my business. And my objective, the way I set it up as is happiness maximization. So when I say happiness, it is everyone who interacts with my business, whether it's me, whether it's my team, whether it's the clients that we work with, whether it's the overall society that we sit in. I want to maximize, try and maximize everybody's happiness as much as possible. So that's where we function, and it just means that 5 years. So now, when we look back, what I really like about it is we have a very happy workforce. So typically, accountants, people have this view of accountants as very serious, grim-looking people with big glasses, not smiling, etc. People walk into our office, and then they see this bright office with floral columns and very happy, chirpy girls. And they're like, oh, wow, this is nice. We like this. So yeah, so I think that's one of the things that we have brought. And then, now with COVID-19, everyone speaks about hybrid working. We started hybrid working from day one. So there was some recent, when Chaminda did a session, he spoke about tech versus touch. So, and we believe the ideal is a combination of tech and touch. And that's what we do. So we have people come into the office on an average 2 to 3 times a week. And the rest of the time they work from home as well. We are paperless as well, mostly. So accountants are notorious for wasting paper. In our entire 5-year history, we probably used 5 bundles of paper. And that is, we are the accounting department for a number of our clients. So we are like multiple accounting departments into one.
So true, really. This is what when we talk about, how employers can help, feel that inclusion part of it. Okay, I think this hybrid working, something that I don't think we'll ever see an era where everybody is going to attend 100% office, physically anymore. Okay, yeah. You're really moving into this hybrid working, still trying to organize the technology of it. Okay. But I think most offices have now kind of, gone into a hybrid working modality now. But it's good to know that, the Hcp Consulting had started this so much earlier, right? So from there, we'll move to close to home for me, okay, in Bangladesh. So Breck Bank is one of the largest leading bank, and we have seen how the bank has evolved over the last some 20 years or so. And we're very lucky to have with us here, Mr. Shaheen Iqbal, who's been with the bank for 17 years now. Breck Bank has the highest credit rating. It's pioneered in supporting SMEs, but works across all, corporate, retail, every sector of the bank. So currently, I'm aware that you're employing around almost 8,000 employees and have 187 branches across the country. So one of the things, when we talk about sustainability, okay, so we know we are aware of the 3 pillars, the environmental part and the social, which is the internal and external stakeholder, and then the economic, which is the profitability and the governance. So what we'd like to hear from you, Mr. Shaheen, is these 8,000 employees across the country at different levels, and I'm sure different backgrounds, how do you make them all aligned and, feel that inclusivity, it doesn't align towards an economic goal, to make a sustainable, sustainable growth that you have shown through Breck Bank. How does it work? How do you do this?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Jenny, and ACCA and the panelists. I think it's an interesting question. Like, let me go back a little bit. Like, how Breck Bank was born. Like, Breck Bank, in fact, was born with a single mission, like to really cater the missing middle. Who are the missing middle? Like our mother organization, probably some of you might heard, like Breck, the largest NGO in the world. So they in fact work on social projects and social development. They are a non-profit organization. Again, in the microfinance business, they have 8 million clients. Out of the 87% is women. So they have an inclusivity agenda. So what they experienced is like there is no one in this market to really cater this missing middle. Means the microfinance institutions are supporting the small, very small entrepreneurs, micro, and the traditional banks who are supporting like corporates. No one is really there to support the missing part, like SME. So that inclusivity, that idea really came in from the then founder of the Breck and the Breck Bank as well, Sarfraz Ahmed. Then he created this bank to cater this missing middle. Like this inclusivity agenda is from day one for this bank. Right now, say something like 55% of our asset is in SME, like the small and medium enterprise. So this is how we cater the unbanked who are really not being catered by any bank. So that's how it is inclusive. Again, Breck Bank's another like subsidiary, if you probably know, like Bikash, Breck Bank owns 51% of the subsidiary. Then they again came in to really unbanked who are really outside the bank. Like here in this market, like 30% of the population is banked. The 70% is not banked. So how we really can really bring those population in financial agenda, like financial inclusion. Then Bikash came in and they're now being included through mobile financial services as well. So this inclusivity agenda is from day one for Breck Bank. And to really make it sustainable, they operated with other models as well, like they're offering retail banking, their corporate banking, and all the businesses that is feasible for them. So that's how this bank is more sustainable. And with the diversification, like you operate in all the segments, and you also include the missing part as well to support the overall economy and the society, that's being really working very well to support the sustainability part and also the inclusivity part. So that's why I think that this is a unique model that is really supporting both the economy and its workforce as well, and the country as well in general. And this single motto is really driving the overall workforce as well. Like they're really aligned to serve this mission, serve this vision, so that we really have been very successful. Even though this bank is relatively new one, as you mentioned, like it is like now the largest bank in terms of market capitalization. It is now the #1 bank in terms of credit rating. So in many indicators, it is leading. Like sustainability and the sustainable business model really outperforms traditional business. That is a clear example of this one. And that's it in brief.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Shaheen. Okay, so I'll move back to Mariam here. Okay, so Mariam, I'm aware that your role is not only to give conference and international conference speaker, but you actually do hands-on work as well. Part of your I think a personal agenda is also you really help in terms of what Chaminda was saying. The inclusion is the implementation, and that's the more difficult part. It's somewhat perhaps easy to talk about diversity and go around giving speeches and strategies. Okay, but then how do you really land it, and have that inclusion? And I'm aware that you do work other than being a CEO of Wattleshare. You actually have employment programs and you work with a not-for-profit sector. Okay, so can you help us, to know what you work across, which sectors of the society, and how do you make them these marginalized sector of the society? How do you make them feel inclusive, and also the larger part of the society? How do you help them accept, different these kind of niche, sectors as well?
Thanks so much, Zinia, for the question. And so when Shaheen was talking about the missing middle, I was almost smiling as well. I mean, all the panelists, such amazing comments. I've been writing notes because such inspirational stuff. But Shaheen, when you were talking about the missing middle, we call it the minority within the minority that sometimes falls through the cracks, that are not visible, that very easily fall through the cracks and are just completely lost in terms of, realizing the full potential of what they could bring to their lives itself, not just work, but their lives and self-fulfillment, enrichment as well. So it's so critical that when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we all come at it from different angles, but fundamentally the person is at the center, and was very similar to what Fayal was mentioning as well, that people are at the core of what we do. So I'm going to give you a really short example of what I do, and then I'll speak about some of the things that we do that perhaps we could pick up on as well. So I work for one of the largest NGOs in Australia, and one of the things that we do, which Zini was mentioning, was employment programs, is we work towards social procurement. And I'm sure quite a few of you are quite familiar with that concept, is around in realizing that organizations will somehow, whenever legislation or any sort of mandate comes around a quota system, it is almost immediately businesses react to with a bit of apprehension, just because they're not sure of how to handle it. They can't source or find talent, and fundamentally also they don't understand talent, or they don't understand people, and so therefore their first response is, let's just find a way to work around it, as opposed to acknowledge the minority within the minority, or the missing middle, and work with individuals to be able to fully harness their potential. So around the social procurement, what we then do is we provide a lot of wraparound, firstly, awareness around the sectors or the individuals that are perhaps falling through the cracks, and then providing linkages to find access to those individuals within societies, and then lastly provide the wraparound support that gets individuals through the hurdle. So it's a dual system. Number one is corporate itself, because of the size and scale and speed in which they operate, if it is hard to fix or hard to fit, they somehow run away from it. So it's about easing organizations to understand these communities, but also assist them with ironing out some of the perhaps miscommunications that get lost in translation from a cold or a cultural, linguistical differences that we have from the different communities that we serve. So it's one thing providing support to organizations through that transition, but also supporting the communities through that as well, because fundamentally these communities are lost in the process of navigating such a complex system, and so therefore supporting communities itself through that transition is fundamentally important. And when I mean communities as well, this is what Chaminda said as well, and quite a few of you, in fact, Prayal, you mentioned this really aptly, which is why I was smiling ear to ear when you said it wasn't diversity about gender itself, but cognitive diversity itself. And that is ultimately what we need to harness is, regardless of where we come from, the variety that we bring to the table is fundamentally important, as opposed to the labels we place upon ourselves. So in summary, one of the things that we've been doing, to summarize the previous point, is just awareness building, access to communities, and also wraparound support to both the organization and the community to be able to find that linkage and iron out those little logistical or cultural or linguistical, whatever differences that we come from, to iron those kinks out so that it becomes more streamlined, easier to communicate, and so therefore both sides give a little to have that kind of compromise. And so in terms of when you look at the inclusion itself, it comes down to this concept, and I love this as well, it's Patchell and Turner's work around in-grouper versus out-grouper. And fundamentally, when you look at diversity and vis-a-vis inclusion as well, like Zenia, you were talking about the party, the reason why you're not at the dance floor is because people dancing are looking at you thinking, oh, you're not one of us, we don't like you, you look different, you walk different, you speak different. And that comes from the people in the dance floor, in-groupers, and everybody outside are out-groupers. It's about trying to beat what that fear and apprehension comes from. And like I mentioned before, awareness building, wraparound support, training. Nashida, you talked about being a champion for people, period. I mean, fighting for what you saw was social injustice. You're wearing it as a badge and fighting for women. Shoaib, you were talking about a mindset change through education. That's fundamentally at the core, the pillar. And Frayal around community-led idea hubs as well. So community-led idea hubs lead change through the people itself. So Shoaib's coming in saying, well, let's institute it through education. Nashida's saying let's institute it through, top-down, top management. And then Frayal, you're saying, people-led grassroots level change as well. So that's fundamentally amazing. But one thing I do want to also articulate is this element of community of practice. Or Zenia, you and I were talking about it yesterday around, industry consortia, about a collective impact that together, as we mentioned today, all of us coming at it with such amazing ideas. So I'm really interested, Zenia, to wrap up by asking you, how do we as industry come together as a consortia with community of practice to share these ideas and, live and breathe some of the ideas I was talking about before?
Okay, so I'll cross across the table, okay, as a panelist. Okay, so yes, I'd be delighted to share what we do at Unilever Bangladesh. Okay, and this thing came up a couple of years ago, just before pandemic, when we were seeing that, so of course D&I was kind of, a big thing, and Unilever globally, really talks about how do we bring in diversity, how do we do inclusion. But then what we realize is, of course, we're one of the largest MNC, especially in the FMCG area, but we alone is not going to help. We belong to the community. It's just like can't do it stand alone. So that's when we kind of, connected with like-minded organizations across this. Okay, there were banks, there were telcos, there were other FMCGs together, and we contacted primarily first the HR departments, and we say that, okay, what can we do together? Okay, and then that's when we this idea of a consortium, and we call it InSpirit. So InSpirit was a platform for like 8 organizations that came together, and we had initially like 3 pillars. Okay, one is on the infrastructure of it. So we have our females working in remote areas as territory officers or sales managers. So how do we pull our resources together? So for example, telcos have their branches all over the country, right? We have our distribution houses, okay? So can we give access to as simple as, sometimes some of the solutions are very simple, come to think of it, as basic as the sales managers, they have to do like go on a route for the whole day, and they don't have access to, hygienic washrooms, okay? So why don't we pull our resources together, our call centers, our distribution houses, and have this kind of, access to all female members of these 8 organizations. Then comes accommodation. Okay, why don't we have like one building which is endorsed by these 8 organizations, and we help them we do the research and we say, yes, this is a safe place to stay. They get a kind of a vehicle or something, so workshops, car workshops, okay, or kind of all this support for them across the country. So that was a initial that was the idea that we put in. Then the second pillar we worked on was on mentorship. Okay, and we actually put in a cross-industry mentorship. So we have small circles, not too many, 3-4 people across the industries, and we have a mentor from a different company. Okay, so 3-4 is all across these 8 organizations. So it's about thought diversity. Okay, you learn from somebody senior from a different. Shoaib here was talking about role models. You may not have a female role model within your own organization. So why not share some thoughts from somebody else? So that's what we kind of set up, and we started doing that. Then the pandemic hit us, but we could continue the mentorship. It was very virtual. Okay, so we went on doing that. And then the third pillar that we are still working on that is the leadership modules. Okay, so how do we have, that was very highly debatable. Why would women need separate leadership modules? Leadership is for everybody, but it's more about employee engagement. Okay, it's not about just females. It was open up to everybody, more focus on females, but it's for females to understand that when they go through this transition of career, and you have what I was sharing with some of you is that the way nature goes is that those 10-15 years when you are supposed to put the best of your career in is also the same time when you also have your kind of your social life, your personal life also kind of having massive transformational changes, and you have to be able to balance both of this together. Okay. And as Nashida was saying about our background, especially where we all come from, it's kind of very conflicting each other. So it's about how do we, at those crucial times, through leadership modules, how do organizations come together and help female leaders, okay, in terms of the thoughts themselves. And I'll come back to Nashida in terms of because I know you work with you have a bilateral council with India, and you help with the young women, and you want to know what's the mental barrier in women, first of all, how do we break that? That's the first step. That's what I think. Okay, so so from here, I also like to say everybody who's streaming into the live discussion, okay, we are going to have a last 10-15 minutes of question and answer. So please do think of your posting your questions, and we will want to discuss your questions. But meanwhile, we do have a question internally, and I'd like to ask this question to Faryal. Okay, in terms of because the usual understanding when you talk about diversity and inclusion, we say, okay, it's an HR work, okay, or it's an organizational development work, okay, but really it really comes back to the individual, okay, and as an individual, Faryal, in your organization, especially if you want to have anecdotes from Interloop, how do you think individual professionals as department heads, as change managers, okay, what kind of role can they play, or things that you want to share with the panel, with everybody who's tuned in?
Absolutely. The discussion is so interesting. There's so many points that I want to touch upon, but I'll answer this question first. HR department absolutely is one of the custodians. That you need to have someone at the helm of this, but you've already touched upon it. Having these change agents within the organization is so important, so crucial. I'll give you a small example. We signed up to this program. Actually, it's Australian, so Mariam, you might know Champions of Change. So we've joined that coalition where you actually have male champions of change. So it's a personal commitment that the CEO signs up, but then it trickles down through the rest of the organization, which is to commit to diversity and inclusion. And what that is doing is, one, of course, having change agents throughout our businesses, department heads, they're getting engaged, they're going on training, they're understanding what's conscious, unconscious bias. But at the same time, it is also then engaging this part of the workforce, which at times feels disengaged, that why do we have so many diversity initiatives and leadership training for women? What about the men? So actually using them and changing them into change agents to build that diverse and inclusive environment, which then means great culture, great engagement, not just for the women, but for everyone within the organization. So we've already got that mindset where it's not just HR department where you have a diversity team, but it's actually champions of change, or male allies, as we call them, across our teams, across our businesses, who are leading this from the front, along with HR, of course.
So, okay, so we'll move a bit from, and I know gender diversity is still a big, discussion. When we talk about diversity, we automatically move into gender diversity, maybe because it's more tangible, you can see it. But one of the difficult things is really to bring diversity in other aspects as well. And here I'd like to move to Mr. Shoaib, okay, in terms of, your organization, Al Mizan Investments, deals with Sharia investment, which is quite a niche sector. And we'd like to know that, your board, okay, with its diverse experience, backgrounds, okay, how does it help having this diverse board, okay, to deal with different prospective clients and really bring, Sharia investments in? How do you achieve your goals, using the board's experience? Sorry, you're mute. Yeah.
Sorry, before Zinia, before I answer your question, let me pick up a point from Faryal's discussion, which is about the champions of change. And this is something certainly which is happening in different parts of the world. And one of the very important areas is this to kind of break this unconscious bias barriers, actually, where the gender is associated with different stereotype personalities and stereotype works. And that is something which is an area where the institutions, and both academics and institutions, can play a very important role to kind of break that stereotype barriers, where people actually, over the period of time, there's an unconscious bias which people develop because of the environment, that certain roles are fit for men and certain roles are fit for women. Men excel in certain areas, for example, mathematics. Women excel in creativity, arts. So these are the stereotypes which we have actually seen throughout our life, and we are all the time exposed to that. So there is a need actually from the HR perspective, as Faryal rightly pointed out, that HR department certainly plays an important role. But the role of HR department, in my opinion, is actually more to kind of steer that discussion and steer that initiative actually, and to provide adequate opportunities for training to people to get over those unconscious biases. So it is certainly not a one department or one function job actually to bring in gender diversity. It is actually a collective responsibility of entire leadership of the organization. Now, coming to your question about the board, so certainly besides gender diversity, as we all know, there are several pillars of the business. There are the social aspect, the economic aspect, and then the inclusion aspect as well. So from that perspective, Al Mizan board, we have been very, I would say, very fortunate that we have a very diversified board, and And as a policy matter, actually, we have about 1/3 of the board members comprising of the independent directors. And the selection of the right members of the board is a very, very important and a conscious decision we take. So from that perspective, not only we have a very good expertise in terms of digital transformation at the board, in terms of one of the board members, because now the entire world is moving towards digitalization, and one of the very important functions of an asset management company is to actually make the customer to have a pleasant customer journey for the potential customers. Because as we all know that we are all surrounded by the banks, and certainly nobody needs to kind of tell anybody when he starts his career to go to a bank and open a bank account, because that is something, a necessity now. You can't operate with a bank account. But in terms of investments, people are not that conscious, and people are certainly, especially the younger generation, is focusing mainly on actually earning and spending. However, given the longevity now, because we are facing that now with the retirement age at 55, 60, 65 in different countries, and people living at up to 75, 80 and 85 years now, it is the role of saving and investment has become very, very important. So it is not only important from the perspective of the countries, but also from the perspective of individuals. So we kind of tried our best to actually leverage our board members in that discussion. And from that perspective, as I said about the digital transformation, we have expertise in legal matters on the board. We also have expertise in strategy. Our chairman of the board is the deputy CEO of Mizan Bank, Ariful Islam Saab, who has certainly a vast experience. And we also, at the board level, we also try to empower our management. So for example, most of our senior executives have gone through the leadership management program at one of the best universities in Pakistan. I have been to Harvard to attend the advanced management program. So what we are trying to do is to actually equip the management more and more from the board perspective to kind of engage more with the customers. And that is perhaps one of the reasons for our success as well. As you rightly said, we are in a niche market, but despite that, alhamdulillah, we have recorded double the overall industry growth rates for the last 10 years. And from in terms of asset management, we used to be one of the smallest players in the industry about 17 years ago, and today, alhamdulillah, we are the largest asset management company in Pakistan. I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, thank you. That was very interesting to know. Something that I think that around the region we can all think of it, enriching the board, because as I think Farial was saying, tone at the top, that really matters. We're talking about unconscious bias, and I move to Nashida. Okay, I'm still, I'm still at this stage of in awe of her concept of all women entity. So tell me, Nashida, when you started off and even now, do you face any kind of unconscious bias, coming from the clients? Do you say them, okay, all women, can they really do it? So share that kind of experiences that you may have had.
Yes. So I mean, when I started this, it was kind of like a social experiment. I had no idea if this would work or not work. So when I now look back, we have our clients come from probably 20, 25 different geographic backgrounds, nationalities, whatever. So which means our model has appeal to, people from very diverse backgrounds. Now, even though women's focus is a core part of our identity, that's not something that we really use to market. So we don't go to the market and say, look, we are a women-only firm, give us business. We go to the market and say we are a high-quality firm, highly focused on our quality of service and everything that we deliver, and therefore give us business. And one thing that I found is that having all women has actually made my job a lot easy in terms of building a high-quality firm. Right. So, so like I said, we have about 20, 25 nationalities. But just to be clear, even though that encompasses, people from different parts of the world, the majority are from Europe and the West. And that probably says something. right? So have I, so in general, how people have taken it, a lot of people have told me, oh, this is brilliant, this is great. So if anyone thinks it's not great, they don't tell me. So there may be some of them, we just don't know about that. So that's one side of it. Then another side of it that I would just like to point out is, because I started this initiative as a women-only firm, a lot of people, when they meet me, they come to me and they talk about women. Yeah, they kind of see me as a women's champion. So they talk about women jobs, women in career, women in whatever. And I see that as a good thing. And there may be some biases that come out, there may be ignorances that come out in those discussions. But at the end of the day, the way we can fix all these biases and prejudices, etc., is through awareness. So by starting something like a women-focused firm, I'm glad that I'm able to have those conversations with people and bring those biases out. And maybe, just probably let them reflect on that a little bit more. And I see that as an opportunity rather than anything else.
Yeah, Sharon, we were discussing, and this is probably the opposite, unconscious bias in the opposite direction, where you think that, assurance by females or females is probably more assuring, so audit and assurance, yeah. So I'll move over to Mr. Shaheen, okay? So Shaheen, Breck Bank, okay, recently has made, headlines, okay? And those who have been following, of course, within the country we are, the headlines that Breck Bank has made is in terms of incorporating a very marginalized sector of the society into the corporate workforce, okay? I must say that at the very same time, Unilever did the same. We just didn't go into the headlines since we're not into bank, but yes, we've done the same, but just only 2 people. I think you have done around 7 or 8 people, right? So can you just tell us a little bit? I don't want to spell it out. I'll leave it up to you to spell it out, which marginalized sector that you have brought in. And I want to know what are the steps you're taking? I want to learn from that. What are the steps you're taking to make them feel inclusive, and more importantly, the rest of the workforce, really make them feel, part of the overall, feel accepted?
Yeah. Thank you. I think it was a concerted effort to really make this happen. You really cannot bring in someone or a particular segment in a day. So it was a long background work to really find them out, to really bring them in the main channel, so that we really can incorporate them in the required job field. Initially, the idea was to say we incorporated.
And just for everybody's, I think, awareness, if they're wondering, which sector we're talking about. So this is where Breck Bank made headlines in terms of recruiting transgender employees, okay? And that was really appreciated, okay, across the country. Yes.
Right. Yeah. In fact, in the first batch, we recruited 5 transgender and then 5 personal with disabilities. So we recruited 10. And to do this, in fact, we recruited some external agencies who really work with them to really find them out with some minimum requirements and all these, to really bring them in the required job area. Before we really brought into them in these jobs, we have to really train the mentors and the coaches to really how they will be accommodating them as well. So it is a concerted effort, and it is not over yet, mainly because we have to really train both the new recruitee and also the other people who will be taking care of them as well. So this is the first step. I think gradually the bank would be recruiting more, so that we can really bring those segments in the broader job market. And also this will create awareness for the overall market as well. As you mentioned, this is the news for others. So other organizations who really care for the society, they will be encouraged to really bring them in, so that they may feel that they are not a segment who cannot be employed or who cannot do any job. In fact, they are like us, and they can perform any job if you can provide them with right kind of training and right kind of opportunities. That's what we are trying to do. Probably we are still the halfway. I think we will only be successful when we see that more and more people will be coming in this segment, and they're getting more recognition. They're again moving in the upper ladder. They're taking leadership role as well. So these are the role probably we have to do as a society. Thank you.
Exactly. I think rightly when you said it was very encouraging, because as I was saying, at the very same time, I think in the same week, in fact, we recruited 2 transgenders as well into our care line sector. Okay. And we were delighted, okay, when we also saw Breck Bank coming with the news, and we felt, okay, we're not the only ones, and we want more companies to do that, and this just should be, yes, we celebrate, appreciate, and then it should just be way of working, okay. And as you said, the training, because they were kind of left out in terms of, education, in terms of background, social etiquette. So this is a bit of a part where I think employers have to, help them pick up the speed. Okay, and I think the mentor idea is very good. That's something I think we can, steal with pride, because at the moment we just have the line manager, the coach, looking after them, but maybe assign a mentor in a different function, to look after, help them as well. So, and help everybody else. Yes, I think, thank you for sharing that with us, Shine Light. Yeah, so I'll circle back to Mariam actually, okay? So because we were talking about academics which Mr. Shoaib was talking about, and I'd like to hear from you, Mariam, because your expertise is also around, around academics. And we're all here, from professional institutes representing different, we have, myself from SEMA, I see maybe as well in Bangladesh, and then we have, CFA, of course, ACCA is sponsoring this, okay? And across, we have a number of institutes around here from the different countries as well. So Mariam, in terms of professional institutes, okay, from your views, how can we help in terms of not just, this is not only about gender diversity, but about overall the role that professionals can play, helping their respective organizations or societies, to accept different sets of diversity, okay, and really more like support the implementation part, which is the inclusion part.
I think one of the biggest things that professional institutions itself, the institution itself, so the professional member bodies like CFA, CMA, ACCA, so on and so forth, can play a really large scope in terms of policy development and change as well. So that's where at a governmental level and also at a much larger stakeholder management level, they can speak to some of the big players, the big fours, the big organizations, the multinational companies around policy change, around the pulse of the people and the changing dynamic of the agenda itself, because a lot of what is needing to be done is already happening at the grassroots level, or it's sort of like bubbling at the surface, waiting to crack, waiting to emerge from the weeds, so to speak. But I think we do need, as one of you were mentioning really well, Freyal, you were talking about champions of change and allies, men or males as allies in organizations. We do need allies, corporate allies as well, big partners, big players that can shepherd that conversation. I think professional member bodies do that to some extent by way of policy papers, by way of research papers. I know that ACCA, Parma, you were sharing as well, the leading inclusion research paper that ACCA does. So a lot of the member bodies in summary could do a lot of policy. And then they can also do, by way of what Shoaib was saying, is around training of the members as well. So policy at the top level, and then training of the members, that is vis-a-vis us, to be the change makers or the agents that then drive change within an organization. And then fundamentally, we as individuals or persons can, as our personal advocacy agenda, make those micro changes within an institution, but also within the teams that we lead. A lot of the training when I go into organizations, especially at the people leader or team leader level, they ask me, we think we can't help. Why are you telling us to make change when it has to be done at an enterprise level? We're just, managers handling 3 to 5 people. And I'm like, well, that's the most amazing way of making change as well, because it's a grassroots effort that then filters upwards. So it's whenever you have any microscopic level of influence over making somebody else's life better, do that, because those micro little impacts become that mighty ocean that collect together as well. So we as professionals can make a change, and professional organization bodies are making change, but also can accelerate that change through policy agenda and movement around legislation, around conversation, and as Nashida was saying, awareness building as well is critical.
So the other bit part of sustainability I'd like to touch upon is the environmental, okay, or the carbon footprint that we play. Okay, and I'll move over to Faryal, because Interloop, being a manufacturing organization, has a role to play in the society in terms of the environmental sustainability. And this is where, Faryal, I'd like to hear from you the role that a diverse board, we talked about board for, from Shoaib's perspective, the diversity of the background, even yourself. I'm aware that you have been working with PwC as a management consultant, for 15 years before you moved to Interloop. So across the leadership board and experiences, how do you help in decision making when it comes to environmental sustainability? If you can share that with us, and maybe after that we can move into some of the questions that has come across from the audience.
Absolutely. Zinnia, like I shared earlier, that Interloop has a diverse board as well as a management committee. So it allowed us to make, like Chaminda said, those bold and ambitious strategies or targets. So not only have we set ourselves to increase our capacity, double our production, but at the same time, we're also have signed up to the business ambition for 1.5, so which is net zero by 2050, or divert 100% of our waste from landfills by 2025. So really, that diversity in experience and gender has pushed us to make these bold ambitions. While setting those targets up, I think what's also been important is that the diversity of our teams has allowed us to build strategies which are tailored to where we operate or understand the cultural nuances. So for example, in Pakistan, our emphasis has been a lot more on community-led initiatives, schools or daycares on sites, whereas in Sri Lanka, the emphasis has been a lot more on water discharge and hazardous chemical. Not saying that one is more important than the other, but given the context that you're operating in, the diversity of your teams allows it to tailor it to individual environments. And last, I'd say is the communication aspect. So working in the field of sustainability, particularly environmental sustainability, you have to communicate with the regulators, with our customers, with NGOs, with local bodies, and that it requires intelligent, thoughtful, and appropriate communication. So I think a diverse teams allows us to really engage all these stakeholders in a much more effective way, and then communicate out our strategies, how we get those plans in place to reduce our environmental footprint, and that's how it all comes together from an environment perspective. I know the time's short, but I wanted to touch upon something which is not necessarily environmental footprint, but something that Shoaib and Ashida were referring to is the availability of talent. There's an absolute dearth, completely agree, when it comes to educational institutes. But I think what Nashida touched upon is really, we need to also understand what are these barriers to working in organizations. And we hire a graduate intake every year. It's 60,000 or more applications for 60 jobs. So there's plenty of applications, but once you have people on board, it's really understanding what keeps them there. How do you retain them? So women for far-flung areas require safe transport, or they need hostels, or they need daycares as they start to develop. So understanding the leaky pipeline. So understanding the barriers to entry and then barriers to retaining retention are equally important as it is to have women come through the pipeline into education. So I just wanted to just make that point and add to the conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Farial. So maybe just take a quick one from Rashida, in terms of, because a couple of minutes from Rashida before we move over to the questions. So Rashida, about the bilateral council that you have between India and Dubai, and talking about just young women workforce, So just share some of the challenges you face.
Maybe let me speak about WICI a little bit more and at what stage we are. So WICI stands for Women's Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And where WICI comes in is earlier, I think it was Shoaib who mentioned about not having adequate role models. And that's exactly where we come in. So this is, so WICI has several councils. Some are within India, many of them are bilateral councils with 100+ countries. So we formed a council, some of us joined together and formed a council between India and UAE. There are 20 women, 10 from India, 10 from UAE, and all highly accomplished in various fields. And the objective that we have set for ourselves is to work with university students in the universities to help them transition into a career life. So it's very new new. We started it about 2-3 months ago. So we've done several brainstorming sessions, and we came up with our initial intervention programs. So we have planned 3 interventions between now and say December, January. So which means we are still early stages, and the 4 early stages to talk about what are the barriers, because we haven't really started interacting at that level. But having said that, there was one of the first things that we have done is to set up something called an I wish I knew wall. So we have set up both a physical wall and digital wall. We've set up in some unis, and other places we are in the process of setting up, where the girls can put their questions. What is it that you wish to know about career life? Yeah, so a number of questions have come in. So you can see what are the things that are troubling their minds, or what are the thoughts in their minds. And a lot of questions are still about how do you balance work and life as a woman, and that's very sad, yeah, because even now, this is the question that's still coming out. I need to say, so these universities are either in India or they are here, but then the primary, majority of the students are from Southeast Asia. So that's one of the main questions that we see coming out. We've seen other questions around, how do I build my self-confidence? And I think in my observation as well, one of the things that I do see, and perhaps books like Lean In actually focus on the same thing, that women probably are too hard on themselves. We demand a lot from ourselves, and either at work or at home, and we, even if we don't meet that exacting standards, it tends to affect our self-esteem or whatever. So that's probably one of the areas that we do need to work on. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that, Rashida. I'm sure we hear this all the time, how do you balance it off?
Yes.
So I have a simple answer, you just cannot have it all. Okay. So.
Yeah, but see, on the other hand, the biggest issue with this work-life balance is that still our traditional societies in particular see women as the primary caregivers. Now, that's what needs to change. So the change needs to come from home. So in a home, both husband and wife are, they're partners, and they need to share the workload. And if until and unless that happens, this question will continue coming.
Exactly. So with that, we'll move over to, so Danish, if you can help us with some of the questions that have come across. And maybe we can just keep it free-flowing. Any of the panelists can pick up the questions.
Sure thing, yeah. So just before we do that, I just wanted to take a moment to thank our partners, the CFA Society Bangladesh, the CFA Society Pakistan, the CFA Society in Sri Lanka, HBL, ICMA Pakistan, Pakistan Business Council, Pakistan Institute of Corporate Governance, the Pakistan Stock Exchange, the Pearl Initiative, and the Sri Lanka Institute of Directors. Thank you. Now I'll be taking relaying questions, and these will be free for all, so please feel free to chime in whenever you have a chance to. We have one over here. In today's competitive job market, employees have high expectations of their employee experience. As the movement towards belonging in the workplace continues, how will leaders ensure that their efforts to create an equitable workplace are met? Shall I repeat that?
Yeah, I think that issue, it'll help, I think, to repeat that.
Yeah,
so in today's competitive job market, employees have high expectations of their employee experience. So as the movement towards belonging in the workplace continues, how will leaders ensure that their efforts to create an equal workplace are met?
So I think if I can pitch in first, I think it is very, very important that when any such programs of encouraging gender diversity are initiated, you have to, on a regular basis, measure the performance. And in some of the cases I've seen, again, in looking at the experience of many organizations, that some very big initiatives were taken by organizations. For example, Google. I recall they spend like $150 million every year on gender diversity and inclusion. And being a global organization, it certainly goes beyond inclusion of both genders, but also because they have like workforce, like I think about there are 70,000, 80,000 employees. And they do a very wonderful job of actually measuring the performance as they check every year as to what is the end result. And certainly the end result is the increase in the participation of women in their workforce. So from my perspective, wherever you are in your journey, it is very important to keep measuring it. Also, another very important area is to provide discussion forums to your employees. And we just talked about the unconscious gender biases, and through these open discussions, some of these gender biases can be addressed. So in my opinion, these are the two important things which would help to kind of measure how you're doing against in terms of performance. I request other panelists to pitch in as well.
I'll just like to add, I think it's probably one of the toughest things as leaders to do to really create this equitable workplace, because the requirements are changing and they're changing fast. Gender diversity is certainly one way of one angle of an equitable workplace. But if you look at the changes that are happening at the workplace, you also have an age diversity, a thinking group diversity, right? Neurodiversity that is coming into our workplaces. So the expectations of what an equitable workplace is are really changing and evolving. So first, leaders or employers, they really need to deep dive and understand what is that definition of a happy or equitable workplace and what works. For example, is it hybrid working? Is it a balance between tech and touch? Is it all open working spaces, or is it offices? So all of that experience is really evolving and changing. So first, we'll have to deep dive, understand what's the expectation, and then build strategies accordingly. So it's going to be one complex challenge as we move forward.
If you don't mind.
Yeah, if I may add my version, like say equitable, I think the very thought behind this equitable means you really need to understand the requirement from each and every angle. Like so if leader's job is to really understand what is the requirement and how to make comfortable your employees. So I think for each and every person, like as Faryal mentioned, like that is age diversity, there is gender diversity, and there are they may be coming from different geographies and their cultural background and all these. You really have to understand their requirement, and if you can really cater their requirement, it may differ from person to person. But if you should be, as a leader, should be able to cater their requirement, and then you'll be equitable, not equal, equitable. That's how probably we can solve the problem. Thank you.
I can probably just add a couple of points. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we said earlier that diversity is easy. Inclusion is the difficult part. And I think a lot of companies, especially the large ones I'm talking about, they all focus on diversity. I think where they fail, or not fail, where they probably fall short is in the inclusion aspect, because the inclusion aspect is something that has to come from the heart. And that, it takes a lot more difficulty. It takes a lot more emotional intelligence, and it's at the leadership level, etc., and at the entire leadership level. So that's one take. Second is as a small business, yeah. So maybe as small businesses, we probably have less of those kind of major complexities. But as a small business, I earlier spoke about happiness maximization as our goal. So our team members, when they come, they say, a lot of people burn out, brown out, these are all very common terms that we hear. Our people, they say, we enjoy coming to office. We are happy coming to office. And so creating that kind of an ecosystem. So it has taken, a number of steps. So it's the focus on happiness maximization, focus on fairness. We have, we are a very open and transparent team. So we discuss everything up front. Even when they have problems, they know they have they are trusted. They can come and talk to me, and we address the problems as and when they happen. So because it's such a happy environment, and our clients, when they deal with it, happiness is infectious. So they are also happy, and therefore the happiness just multiplies. So from a small business, this kind of an interaction, this kind of transparency, mutual trust, etc., I think that has really, really worked well for us. And especially there was a specific word in that question which I liked. It said belonging in the workplace. So to create that sense of belonging, all of this have really helped us.
Can I add just 2 points? Just when you talk about this, I think the challenge here is that when you bring in this inclusivity, the organization suffer from performance, because you don't want the poor performer to pinch in and upset the apple cart. So that's where sometimes most of the organization find it difficult to bring that element into the picture, because when you get everyone on board, can we really drive the performance with people who can perform? I think it's a strategic tool that we need to use in organization to see how you bring in that element. So it doesn't mean that you bring everyone to the table. It's just that you identify each one's capacity and create platforms for them to contribute. This is why even this strategic planning, we talk about this bottom-up approach, right? You have the top layer sitting in the boardroom, but at the same time, you create small circles in the lower levels for them to give their input and bring that up, not to bring them to the boardroom and make them inclusive in that sense. I think it's about how you strategize the whole thing, identifying it's like the 5 fingers of your hand, right? Not everyone is the same. So how you get everyone a chance in their own way. And that's where the battle is in terms of performance and inclusivity. Just to add something. Thank you.
Right, thank you. So in the interest of time, we'll just take one more quick question. Some organizations include females as a means to an end, right? So as a box ticking exercise or as a quota. How do we identify and how do we mitigate this?
So maybe I can just add one point here. So having a quota system is basically focusing on the results, focusing on the outcome rather than the reasons for or for what it is. So I didn't quite understand what we mean by how do we mitigate it, but from my perspective, is a quota system beneficial? I would say yes and no. One thing, it does bring a few people, for some of the, from a point of having no women or very few women, it does bring a few women, push a few women into the forefront, and maybe a handful of them, or maybe more than a handful of them, then will shine, and then they will then become the role models or mentors for the next generation. So it does help, but then when it is just done as a tick the box exercise, as Chaminda just mentioned, then it's not helpful at all. So the core idea is by having a quota system, all that we're doing is we're focusing on the outcome without really looking at the underlying causes. What we should probably have is a combination and more focus on the underlying causes.
And also, just to add here, this is really, when you put up a gender balance or gender diversity as a KPI in your organization, you tend to fall into this trap, of just getting, tick the box of thing. And one of the things I can say from my experience is that it's not about getting women into the workforce. It has to start before that. The conscious thing you have to do is have, say, female CVs, potential candidates coming in. That was not something done before. But when it really comes to selection, it has to be based on talent. It has to be the right fit for that role or for the organization. There is no compromise on talent. There's no compromise on the right skills that you need for that role or for your organization, not particularly one role. But for years, what organization never did, they never cared about who's really applying in. But if you make that conscious effort of the applications at least having a 50-50, then you increase your chances of having the talent as well as bringing the diversity from a gender perspective. So you have both of it in. So that's some way maybe to mitigate that, but absolutely no compromise on talent. Yeah.
And just to add one more thing, and as you said, we mostly look at from it from an outside perspective, right? We see how far we attract people, but how much of effort is put into align your job profile and the requirement to suit that diversity that we're looking for. Sometimes the job description is designed in such a way that it won't fit for certain caliber, maybe for female or whatever, right? If you're really keen about it, how much effort you need to put in to design the job to suit that caliber that we're looking for. That is also an element, I think, especially the HR need to do within the organization before you go out and look for diversity in the applications.
Great. Thank you all so much. That was an insightful session. I'm mindful that we have gone 4 minutes over time. I'd now like to leave it to you, Zinnia, if you have any closing remarks, please.
So I would just close. You close with a vote of thanks to the partners. I would do with a close of a vote of thanks to all the panelists here. Thank you for giving your time, not only for now, but also the last couple of days that you've connected with myself. And it was absolutely amazing to hear, all of you. I'm really hope, the audience, who streamed in, really got some really nice gems from all of you, and, can go back and apply this back to wherever, they're working. Okay. And we do hope to be in touch, okay, through forums or whatever groups are, okay. And learn from each other all the time. So thank you everybody who streamed in, and of course the panel here.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you all.